What's going on? Slip is here with match 2 of Brain Control. So here's our opening hand. We're on the play. Esper Charm is good, can help us kind of balance this out if this hand isn't particularly strong in whatever matchup we're up against. I decided I'm going to keep it. We'll just play Colonnade here. And we see Creeping Tar Pit, so we're thinking either Grixis or... We drew Serum Visions, I apologize for snapping through that really quickly. Playing probably against Grixis, could be Fairies theoretically, in which case this hand would be pretty strong. Esper Charm for Bitter Blossom, plus a bunch of removal and a Verdict. Another land untapped. Looking like Grixis. Logic Knot's maybe a fine draw. Watery Grave. Okay. And now we see Esper, which is weird because it's playing Creeping Tar Pit. So not Esper Drago. Maybe we're looking at like Narset Control or something like that. Should be pretty good. Here's Lingering Soul, so that's telling us we might be playing against Narset. So we can counter this or not. I decide I'm not going to counter this. Eventually, our Verdict is going to level this out. We can even remove it. I mean, we assume our opponent's deck isn't going to have much to remove, so we can just kind of deal with this. I'm not going to counter it just in case our opponent wants to play a Planeswalker here. For example, Jace. Jace, pretty good against us. Opponent shocks and swings. We're hoping he plays Lingering Souls here. We want to Esper Charm on end step. So we're not sure what our opponent's holding. Lingering Souls doesn't go well with a deck that runs counters. However, we haven't seen any hand disruption, which I find kind of suspicious, honestly. So we draw a bunch of lands, not really doing a ton. And I probably should have gone ahead and used a piece of removal since we were going to discard. I discarded a path. I don't think we need 3 paths. I probably should have just used the push at that point, so we didn't have to discard. That was a mistake. I'm going to push this, start taking 1 a turn. Encouraging our opponent to tap out for Creeping Tar Pit is something that's probably going to help us in the long run. And now we see a Steam Vents, so this is bizarre. We have, like, so lists I know, right, that would run Esper with red are the, like, Ryan Horvis Esper Drago deck, which this is obviously not. That wouldn't be running Tar Pit, let alone Souls, right? Souls pretty rough there. So we're not sure what we're playing against. I guess now we have to worry about Bolts. I mean, it would seem our opponent isn't going to be too far in the red cards, so maybe they're playing red utility cards like K-Command and Electrolyze. And he's playing Gifts on Given, so we're playing Esper Gifts, I guess. Makes sense with Lingering Souls. An interesting deck here. Obviously playing a Brew, which is okay. I mean, we're playing a Brew and we're in the comp league. Can't be complaining about that too much. So we're gonna push this token, force our opponent to tap at least like play the second Lingering Souls. Still no Tar Pit attack. Unsure what our opponent's holding up here. There's a Logic Knot. So in my mind, if we have Logic Knot, that means we can just tap out for Verdict here and counter. If our opponent plays something big next turn, we can counter it. Hopefully our opponent fires up Tar Pit, but no such luck. And we draw Beck Call. So we could cast Call here. We haven't seen any indication of counter magic, but we haven't given our opponent a lot of chances to counter things. Except for the Esper Charm, we haven't really played anything that was worth countering. Now our opponent plays Snap. So only target Snap can get is Gifts. So we could let the Snap resolve and counter the Gifts, or we could just counter the Snap now and prevent him from having a 2-1. That seems better. If he counters this, he still can't cast Gifts. So we're basically like the same. You know, we end up the same if we counter this and Logic Knot gets, I don't know, something. I guess he could remand his Snap and that would be a little annoying, but even so. Seems good. So no counters from our opponent. And he plays K-Command, getting back Snap, so that's weird. So this might be some kind of like, I mean, we might think it's a kind of a Grixis deck with a little white just for souls, but obviously we've seen gifts. Opponent only has one red source out. So I'm a little confused at this point. Still doesn't fire up Tar Pit. Means he's going to snap gifts probably. We can Serum Visions here, and we draw a Spell Snare, which is a great top deck, and I'd top that Cryptic, because I'm just not sure what our opponent's doing. Snap, we're going to Snare, Leak and Remand, not doing a ton here. And our opponent plays another Snapcaster Mage. K commands. This time, we could discard Path or Beck Call, and Path would make a lot of sense to keep, in the sense that our opponent's going to have a couple creatures soon. However, I think Beck Call is more likely to get us back in this game. Opponent swings. Plays a Lingering Souls. Doesn't flash it back. And we have Cryptic. So I kind of want to Cryptic tap our opponent's team. And then maybe he counters that. If he does and we draw a land, we can fuse Beck Call. Still doing okay here. Trying to imagine what our opponent's doing. I decided to give it an extra turn for the Cryptic. We're not under a ton of pressure here. This doesn't seem like the kind of deck that could support a playset of bolts. So here we have 7 lands. So one more land, we can fuse Beck Call next turn. We could Beck now. That would be okay. On the other hand, we actually have to draw into removal for this Creeping Tar Pit. So that's kind of annoying. If we Cryptic tap down our opponent's team, we get hit for 3. If we play Call now to block everything but the Tar Pit, we still get hit for 3. If we let our opponent swing, we get hit for 4. And then if we play Beck Call, we lose. So at this point, we could... I'm not sure. We can see what's happening here. I decide I'm going to tap the team. Let's see what happens. We draw land. That means we can Beck. And we draw another land. So here we can block like a token with Colonnade if he's playing super passive with his Tar Pit. It seems like our opponent's hand is full of removal because it's certainly not full of anything else. The issue with fusing Beck Call right now is that so far we've just represented a regular Esper deck, which for some reason has a breeding pool in it. And who the hell knows what our opponent makes of that. But I decide we're like kind of far behind here, and because the Tar Pit puts us on a 2-turn clock, any counter and we just flat lose here. If our opponent has a Cryptic command, we flat lose here. If we don't draw a piece of removal, we flat lose here. Well, I guess we have Ghost Quarter. So, I mean, if they have a Bolt, we lose, right, to Tar Pit and Bolt. I'm not sure. I decided to just scoop here, which I think is a little premature. I was actually going to cast Beck Call, and then I decided not to, and probably should have just done that. But I scooped. I didn't want to reveal this card. I thought maybe it would influence our opponent's sideboarding in a way that we didn't want to. So, like for example, the K commands. K command, it's okay for the Snapcaster engine, but it didn't really do much else that game. And, you know, we obviously have card advantage sources. Maybe we could encourage our opponent to board out 1 or 2 K commands if we don't suggest that we play Brain in a Jar. So on to game 2. All right, back with game 2 here, our second match. We're on a play, which is good, and we see this hand, which is solid. So we have turn 2 Brain in a Jar. We have a Spell Snare for Snapcaster, or a potential counter, like if our opponent plays Negate, Leak, Remand off our Beck Call. Since this spell doesn't work, and neither does Snare, it's pretty nice. So we're going to Shock and Serum Visions. We're going to hope to get a land. And we see Negate Swamp. So I decided I kind of want both of those. So our plan is currently next turn to play Brain in a Jar, and then the following turn we can tick up Brain in a Jar and have Negate. Then we have like Negate and Snare for a counter or K command when we actually fuse. So I'm going to top those. Doesn't really matter what order because it doesn't change. Our opponent gives us the go-ahead as far as Spell Snare is concerned, which is nice of him. So we're hoping our opponent plays a K command here, but doesn't play a red source. Plays Relic of Progenitus. Nice thing about not using our graveyard really for a blue deck, people board in cards like that that don't do anything. Although it's good against Logic Knot, but at the same time you can't really like foresee Logic Knot, and you can't do this in response to prevent from delving, so the preemptive business is kind of sketchy. Here we see some lands. I don't mind having one more of those. I think we'll top the Delta. And then we'll wait for our opponent to untap. This is effectively, so we fuse here. There's no way our opponent can counter this through Spell Snare and Negate. And we prevent them potentially from playing a Lingering Souls this turn because they would draw us 2 cards. I would love it if they played a Lingering Souls, actually. So we do this. Our opponent does not have a counter. Still not sure what their deck is doing. We draw Esper Charm, which is potentially good. Although they're a Lingering Souls deck, so it's potentially not so good. I don't fetch there just because I really don't know what to expect, honestly. Could have fetched. I could have fetched. We had Negate for like Gifts Ungiven. I guess that's the only thing our opponent could really do that's relevant. We're just going to swing for 4. Our opponent pushes. That seems good. Emptying out his hand. I like it. We could Esper Charm him at this point, but since he was we were discouraging him from playing Souls last turn, he might still have a Souls. Although effectively it's like counter Souls. So I decided to do it. It's like countering half of the Souls, and then if he like, you know, taps a bunch of mana, we can negate it or something really to keep the board clear. Probably wouldn't do that. Now our opponent dispels Esper Charm, so we could get into a fight over this dispel, but we cannot, like, if our opponent has a Planeswalker, say a Jace here, we negate the dispel, our opponent lets that happen, discards 2, and then plays land Jace, we lose, probably. I mean, we have this Colonnade, but we have a Colonnade and our opponent would have to draw into removal because they would be almost empty-handed. So I decide I'm just going to let this happen. That's fine. He can trade 1 for 1. We're so far ahead. And then I'm going to Peer Through Depths on end step. Oh, incidentally, for sideboarding in this matchup. So I brought in the Negate and the Dispel. I shaved 1 Logic Knot because I didn't think we needed quite that many counters, but I thought that Negate and Dispel were both upgrades. So shaved 1 Logic Knot for that. I didn't really want Stroms. I think I would prefer on the play to be playing into Brain in a Jar, or in general. So far, I just feel like Stroms, we don't want to be tapping out necessarily. Ruined Halo doesn't do anything. I boarded out of Blessed Alliance. I boarded in the Surgicals because we're not... I mean, first of all, the K-Command Snap Loop is a little annoying, so if we can get rid of either of those cards, that's pretty good for us. I left in the 1 Supreme Verdict, but didn't bring in Explosives. Also, Surgical, pretty good against Gifts, depending on whether our opponent's actually running some kind of like finisher with Gifts. Could just be a kind of value play, I'm not sure. We're going to Peer. Our opponent gets feisty with a Snapcaster Mage, which he's going to dispel our Peer Through Depths. That seems a little loose. We get a path, no reason not to fetch here. And we draw a Snapcaster Mage, so that's pretty good. We could snap Esper Charm our opponent, and we're in decent shape. For the moment, I'm just going to swing and play Jar. I kind of feel like having a second Jar active is pretty good. Opponent cycles Relic. Another reason Snap Esper Charm wasn't terribly good. They had more cards than appeared. There's a Lingering Souls. So now, despite the fact that our opponent has a Colonnade on board, we have a Ghost Quarter. I'm just going to push one of these Souls so we get to keep 2. Seems good. I actually was thinking about it. I ticked this up. I could have just cast it off this and ticked down the other Jar. Probably would have been better. But I clicked through that a little fast. So we'll just push off the mana. Now probably play Colonnade, get in. Our opponent's gonna trade this, which is fine. We're gonna negate more or less whatever our opponent does and hold up Snap Negate. There's a Souls. Negate that. And now we probably want to take down Jar. No, we didn't take down Jar. That's interesting. I guess I was playing around K command. We had a land in hand. I don't think we need to do that, actually. I guess gifts. We yeah, it makes sense. We don't really know what the hell our opponent's doing with gifts ungiven. It's not really making a ton of sense in their deck beyond Lingering Souls, so... I guess the K command, like, you set up your snap K command loop. That's kind of funny because I feel like a lot of people who play Grixis in general of the Cory Burkhart variety get trapped into how powerful that K command snap loop seems, and they just kind of like rut about it and sometimes misplay. So it would be kind of funny if our opponent was gifting just to kind of like fall into that rut. Maybe gifts would be better served as another card. Regardless, here's an Electrolyze. I decide I'm just going to snap counter this. We're about to scry a bunch, and you know, we have a reasonable board presence at the moment. Keep our opponent from drawing one and get him down to 5. He can't block with Colonnade next turn because we have Ghost Quarter. So we're going to fetch and then scry down. And we see Brain in our Jar, Logic Knot, Ghost Quarter. So if we draw the right combination of things, Logic Knot could just let us win this turn. And I think we probably want to top that. We definitely don't want Jar, and we don't want Ghost Quarter either. So we'll just top Knot here. Now, I was thinking about when I top Knot, just swinging for the win. But at the same time, we're ahead. Our opponent can't block here, and I might rather just have them take 4. We haven't seen any evidence of sweepers, so I decided not to swing with the Colonnade. If we had drawn like maybe a Dispel here, would have been okay with it. Pathing our Snapcaster is fine. Opponent down to 2 cards in hand, and we have a counter. 3 cards now, so 2 of those cards have to be relevant for our opponent to win here, and we get to Brain in a Jar, like tick up 1, tick down the other. Our opponent K commands, so we could let this resolve actually, but I decide I'm not going to do that. We'll just keep our bird token here. Seems pretty good. And now we tick down the other Jar. And if we draw a counter here, we're in great shape. Godless Shrine is a no. There's an Esper Charm, so this is perfect. Even better than a counter. We can Esper Charm our opponent, so that's 3. This is enough to activate Colonnade, and then 3, obviously not literally with the Ghost Quarter. But we can Esper Charm our opponent before we activate Colonnade. Make sure they don't have a piece of removal for it. They have to burn the removal on these, and we win. So that's great. Even if our opponent has Electrolyze here, it doesn't matter. So it's good. On to game 3. Alright, game 3 here. So we know our opponent kept Kolaghan's Command in, but I think overall, you know, if we draw a land, Esper Charm is pretty good. We have turn 2 Jar if our opponent gives us the go-ahead on that one. I think this is okay. I decide I'm going to keep it just because our opponent doesn't really seem to do much. We don't know a lot about his hand. He's using kind of like value cards that are maybe in the wrong deck a little mediocre, like Electrolyze and K command. I'm not sure. We just haven't seen a lot. There's a Dispel. We could probably expect a Spell Snare. Here we draw a second Jar, so I don't see any reason not to just play this into a counter. Opponent does not counter, so no Spell Snare there. Opponent K commands. We're going to discard Fatal Push, and we're going to Jar again. Unfortunately, we don't have a black source here. That's too bad. Opponent passes, so that's probably good for us. Except our opponent has a second K command, so he's really playing the anti-Jar game, which is fine. So one thing about this match, this is I kind of saw what our opponent was doing in the second game a little differently. We didn't see counters, and where in, like, say, a match versus Esper Drago, I would not want Sram's Expertise, I believe. In this matchup, Saram seems fine. So I did board one back in, probably for a path. I would have to check exactly what how this is different from the last one. I apologize. But I did board one Saram's back in. So that's something. Unfortunately, we don't have an Ancestral Vision in hand. We can't cast that off the jar that he destroyed. Although that would have been a hilarious blowout. So we're just going to hold up Cryptic here. We're going to hope to draw a Black Source. We do draw a Black Source. In fact, a painless one. Opponent electrolyzes us, so that does nothing. I mean, cycles on a card and does 2 damage. It's good, but our opponent misses a land drop here. Fantastic. We're going to Esper Charm, draw 2. No point in making our opponent discard, in my opinion. Our opponent dispels Esper Charm. Interesting. There's that counter we saw last game. Negate, not doing a ton. I guess at this point we kind of assume we're not playing against a Planeswalker deck. Just because this like mana is so messy and the value plays are taking up so much space. Hopefully our opponent plays White Source Lingering Souls. We can Cryptic. Nothing. There's a path. Not really doing a ton. And our opponent plays Gifts Ungiven. So we could negate this, but while that represents something, it doesn't actually let us do anything. Like, we could path a Tar Pit. Our opponent seems to be really passive with the man lands, so I'm not super worried about that. I would rather Cryptic this, draw a card. If we get another land also in the next couple of draws, then we have Cryptic and Negate up on the same turn. So I think cycling is worth potentially letting our opponent play something here. We draw Sram's Expertise. So that's pretty sick. One more land, and we can Sram's Fuse Beck and have Negate up. So that's pretty good. Our opponent plays Lingering Souls. So we're in the clear. There's no 1-mana counter that our opponent could be playing, like Invasive Surgery. Is that the sorcery one? So we're just going to do this up, and if we draw a second land, we have Negate 2. We're just going to play that out. Not Serum Visions yet. Opponent a little behind on board. Flashes back Souls. No attacks. We're both at 16. So I have Negate and Cryptic up. Could shock and also hold up Path. Could shock and play Serum Visions. A lot of options. I decide I want to swing with everything here. We have a Path for the Tar Pit if our opponent doesn't block. That's fine. We have a Verdict if our opponent like floods the board with Souls somehow. Pretty good. I decide I want to shock and play Serum Visions. Since our opponent blocked everything, their only threat is currently a Tar Pit. And we see a Brain in a Jar, which I don't mind at all. I don't think I really want this Ghost Quarter, but it could theoretically do things. There's a Tar Pit on board, and our opponent plays both Tar Pits and Colonnades. Okay, opponent still has to deal with these 3/3s. 3/1/1s, sorry. And here, we're just going to swing. Hopefully our opponent plays like Snap Electrolyze. Opponent plays Tar Pit. So this is interesting. So we could path the Tar Pit, get in for 3. But if our opponent's hand is currently on the, like, I'm going to activate Tar Pit, and you're only going to do me 2 damage this turn and then 1 damage the next turn. Like, if I swing here and our opponent does this again, that's going to be pretty sick for us, actually, because we're going to get them to tap out in a way that lets us fuse Beck Call soon. Also, if we play Jar, he's going to have this decision between like K-commanding and doing this little bullshit here. I decided I'm just going to let him do this. I'm going to let him take a token from us. I'm going to play Jar. We have Negate and Cryptic up. It's pretty good. Opponent does nothing. So our opponent is on this, like, I'm going to block with a Tar Pit or Colonnade kind of deal, which I find pretty sweet. Activate Jar. Peer through Depths. Not a bad draw. I'm going to swing again. Here is a Tar Pit. So pathing Tar Pit probably makes a lot of sense here. I actually don't path the Tar Pit. I kind of clicked through that. I don't know why. I was actually thinking about verdicting, verdicting the tar pit here. Just to, like, we lose a token, but then we also get to fuse bet call, and we have a path for the colonnade. I think that's a pretty reasonable play. However, I don't end up doing it. I end up fusing bet call, so it would have been better to just path the tar pit, I think. Our opponent plays negate, which I'm going to negate. And we're going to get a bunch of 1/1s. So I think that was a little sloppy that turn. You know, we're like, our opponent has a lot of cards in hand, but we're so far ahead here. I'm not sure what's going on, honestly. So I'm feeling like pretty good about our position. It's just a little suspect, like what's happening on this side of the board. Here's a polluted delta. I could again path the tar pit. I'll do it next turn. We can peer at the end of this turn. Not even sure what we're looking for at this point, like a counter. Opponent plays Snapcaster Mage. So he could snap Dispel the Peer, which seems incredibly loose, or he could just snap Gifts and try to win the game here. Maybe. We don't know what his Gifts is doing. So I decided to just let the snap resolve. He's going to snap Electrolyze. So this is fine, barring a second copy of Dispel, which he has not really given us reason to believe he has. I can just Cryptic this Electrolyze. And we see Path Serum Visions, so I take the Serum Visions. We draw Water Grave, which does nothing. I'm going to Serum Visions first here. There's a push. Dispel is a particularly good draw. So I'm going to fire up Colonnade. Our opponent's at 9 right now. So we have a path, and the fact that we drew Dispel, our opponent has 1 mana up, means I don't believe we can lose this. So we fire up Colonnade, barring like a gut shot here, which would actually do more damage to our opponent than us. All of these are going to get through. So we want to path. We have 3 mana. It doesn't matter whether we swing first and use the Vigilance. So we path the Snap. Nothing. And now we're going to swing in. Our opponent pushes. We Dispel. We had enough mana. Otherwise, you know, we would have wanted, like, if we only had 2 mana up, we would have wanted to swing with the Colonnade first. So we could have still done that. In this case, it doesn't matter. Our opponent's tapped out. And we finish him off. So kind of weird game there. I was a little confused about what our opponent was doing, so sorry if the lines were a little sloppy. But we pulled it off, 2-1. So that's good. I'll see you for match 3.